We've already discussed surprises in musical form and how they can be either musically convincing or sound totally wrong. You want to talk more about these anomalies. I've been teaching musical composition, harmony, counterpoint, and orchestration for many years, and one thing that strikes me again and again is how much of my work has to do with spotting anomalies. These might be a mistake in a harmony or a counterpoint passage, or a passage of the composition that just sounds wrong. But my job is to always show the student why the moment in question sticks out, how to make it better. Often students have the idea that if they follow all the rules, then a counterpoint or harmony exercise will be successful. But this is wrong. There are lots of things that sound wrong, which are not covered by familiar roles, simply because they don't happen very often. And sometimes you can do something that breaks a rule that does sound good. The important thing is to sensitize your ears and to know why something works or not. For example, traditional counterpoint exercises don't allow seventh chords. But there's no reason that more advanced students shouldn't use them, provided they are A, easy to sing, since traditional counterpoint is for voices, and B, sound logical in context. Here's an example. This counterpoint exercise has a seventh in the third bar. It really sticks out. Why? Well, it's the only seventh chord in the whole exercise. The seventh is approached by leap, and the voices are moving in the same direction. In addition, it occurs at a place where nothing special is occurring, so it sounds like a mistake. But what about here? Here I fixed the problematic seventh chord, but now there's a different seventh chord in the penultimate measure. But why does this one sound okay? Well, for one thing, it's not approached by a big leap, but it also happens at a special moment, the cadence. As a result, it doesn't sound nearly as out of place. This is the kind of oral sensitivity that the student needs to acquire for use in their own music. Both examples break the same rule, but one sounds wrong and the other one sounds fine. The first example was an anomaly. It stuck out a lot at a moment where nothing special was happening. In the second example, the seventh is less salient and arrives at an important moment. Here's another example. Most musicians will recognize this. It's the start of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but with a surprise. Well, as it stands, the trombone cluster sounds ridiculous, totally out of place. But I could think of a situation, say in a movie, where it might suit the story very well. Say a youngster is practicing the piano and suddenly something very surprising, even threatening happens. Then the story would justify this anomaly. So anomalies are always context dependent. In the previous lesson about style and what sounds normal in a given situation, we've already talked about this. Here I want to explore the possibilities and the limitations of anomalies in more detail. Another example. As it stands, the change of rhythm in measure 6 just sounds strange, out of place. But now listen to this. This makes more sense. Why? Well, what stood out as an anomaly in the first version now has a follow-up. The rhythm that stood out in measure 6 now develops further. So what attracted our attention in the first exercise here leads to a different continuation. Note that I haven't changed the harmony or the texture. I've just continued the dotted note rhythm. So for the listener, the question in measure 6 now has an answer and has made the music take a new turn. And this is the most important point about anomalies. Anomalies are like questions. They occur alone, With no follow-up, when nothing special is happening, the listener is just left a bit distracted, even frustrated. This brings up another important aspect of listening to music with full attention. We often have to retrospectively assess what we heard. First, something attracts our attention, then we see a reason for it, or not. But if it is followed up or coordinated with something else that seems significant, like a cadence or a climax, it can actually add interest for the listener. Note that this isn't a conscious process. It happens extremely fast. Since evolutionists favored minds that see patterns in what's going on around us, we notice patterns everywhere. And then when a pattern is broken, we instinctively look for a reason. If your dog suddenly starts barking, you look around to see what's happening, and your subsequent behavior will depend on what you see. Again, context can make something right or wrong. When something happens is just as important as what happens in music. Another example of context is what we might call the musical frame. For example, that our last example occurred only once in a long movement lasting 20 minutes. Well, the local context still makes sense, but once we are more familiar with the whole movement, we might find it strange that this little idea is never taken further. This is part of what I call the composer's sense of form. When I compose a larger piece, I will listen to it many times as I work on it. When I've gotten to the point where the whole piece is sketched out in detail, I often look for anomalies like this. They're often a sign that something should be developed further. But again, when something happens matters a lot. For example, if the anomaly occurs at the climax of the whole movement, it makes sense. The climax should be a unique moment. But if it occurs when nothing else makes it feel significant, the attentive listener will be just a bit confused. The most famous example of this in the classical repertoire is the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Here's the opening, in a piano reduction. That fermata in the last bar we see here is quite strange, even more so because one note, the high G, keeps sounding while the rest of the chord disappears. It almost sounds like a mistake, so it attracts our attention. If it were never followed up, we'd wonder, why did Beethoven do that? But when it comes back in the recapitulation, it leads to something wonderful. Here, the same pause and sustained high G lead to a beautiful oboe solo. This enlarges the emotional scope of this movement enormously. It's the only time a sad, melancholy moment appears within the overall very forceful energy. Now we understand why Beethoven has prepared this moment in such a salient way. At the beginning, he has created a very striking anomaly, a question, that's only answered much later in the movement. When the answer arrives, it's worth the wait since it's so expressively special. This is an example of the kind of generosity we see in great composers. They work hard to make the musical experience as rich as possible, really special. This movement would still be powerful without that fermata and without the oboe solo, but not as rich. Like so many of Beethoven's other innovations, this richness makes the movement worth hearing more than once. So this is one of the most important jobs for a composition teacher, pointing out anomalies and explaining how to make them meaningful.